We're going to be looking at the top 10 worst cities in Florida for jobs. And what a better place to start than by comparing incomes in Florida's best cities to the incomes of cities you're likely considering moving from if you're heading to Florida. Fort Myers is one of the fastest growing communities in Florida. Incomes in Fort Myers are slightly less than Chicago. Poverty rates are about the same. Surprisingly, the commute time in Fort Myers is almost as bad as Chicago, even though that's a metropolitan area of nearly 10 million people. But it gets even worse than that. If you really wanted to be fair, the average age in Chicago is 38, while the average age in Fort Myers is 49. Most of the income in Fort Myers is distributed to elderly people in retirement. Most of the income in Chicago is younger people who are actually working, which means that the income disparity in Fort Myers is still much larger than it is in Chicago. So if you're a younger person who's still in the labor force, even though the analytics over the top may appear like incomes in Chicago and Fort Myers correlate evenly, the reality is they don't. You have to really know the difference between workforce income versus passive income and other sources of income that people in retirement ages are going to have. Then you also have to consider that the state of Florida is practically two different states within one, with real estate prices in South Florida being as much as twice higher than North Florida, which means that you cannot compare Miami to Jacksonville by simply looking at the incomes, because housing costs can be as much as twice as much in the southern region of the state. So if we were just to look at incomes and compare city to city based off their incomes, we would be missing a lot. So let's just go right ahead and eliminate all these outlying factors so we can focus on what really are the top 10 worst cities in Florida for incomes. Some of the metropolitan areas that have the absolute worst incomes analytically would have been the same areas that I would recommend you don't move to in Florida if you're looking for good jobs. So the fact that there's a little bit of concordance between analytics and my real life experience means that we're off to a great start on today's video. This is a video that I have actually been working on for quite a while, but I was reluctant to release the video because the analytical information available just didn't match up to what I understood were the worst places for jobs in Florida. However, we have new information available, and what I believe are the worst markets in Florida in personal life experience are also the same ones that the analytics are showing. Therefore, I can feel more comfortable giving you guys this video and feeling confident that the information you're getting really is very accurate. Because after all, if you're watching this video because you're moving to Florida, you would want to have accurate information, not some idiot's opinion. Highlighted in green are the metropolitan areas that I've had the privilege to live in. Luckily for me, have been some of the nicest, richest parts of Florida. Having lived for over 20 years in Naples, Florida, the richest metropolitan area in the entire state, don't think for a minute that those high incomes are just going to automatically apply to you. In fact, 18% of minors in Collier County are living below the poverty line, and Naples has the third highest income inequality in the entire country. Besides the fact that Naples really was the playground of the ultra wealthy, its wealth is actually being washed out, diluted you could say, as it's becoming more of a middle class type city or metropolitan area than a wealthy enclave like what it used to be. In about 20 years in Naples, Florida, I don't even think I made $30,000 in my best year. So again, you cannot just look at an area and say, this is the average incomes in this place and expect that you're going to make that. There's a lot of outlying factors, like the fact that there's just a lot of very wealthy individuals that just with their personal income are able to completely offset those analytics. Florida is one of those tax burdened states that people flee to, and therefore you're going to have people who on paper live in Florida, but in reality they really don't. They're just here so they don't have to pay state income taxes where they actually live. I promise you we'll get to our top 10 list. I just want you guys to understand that this list is looking at the bulge of the average core of the workforce, and we're taking into account any type of discrepancy or anything that could distort the actual representation of somebody entering the labor force here. One of the biggest outliers is the Vero-Sebastian metropolitan area. Now we're looking at our income analytics from different sources, and on a few lists, they are showing up as high as the second in the entire state of Florida. The reason being is that there's wealthy people on the islands who make a lot of income, and I can guarantee you if you move to Vero or Sebastian, that will not be your income. With the average Joe in this county being almost 56 years old and getting older by the day, we can only assume that the vast majority of that income is some type of retirement income and not actually coming directly from the local labor force. So we can assume that the younger a population is, the more accurately those analytics depict the actual potential value of a labor force, and the older the population in a county or metropolitan area is, the weaker those analytics represent what the actual labor force in those counties look like. A lot of people don't really realize how poor Florida really is. If we eliminated the 1% of top earners and looked at the 99% where most likely you and I currently sit in, it would actually be less than the state of Alabama and Mississippi. The 99% or the bulk of the people living in Florida are actually in practice poorer by income than the state of Alabama. However, their rents are easily 2 times higher, and if we go into South Florida, even 3 times higher. Then you got hurricanes, you have increasing insurance costs, you have a lot of regional problems you're going to have to deal with in Florida that you may not have to deal with in other states. So it's important to know if you're looking at moving to Florida to look beyond just simply what the projected income is for a city registering your vehicle in Florida. If you're making an out-of-state transfer, it usually costs about $700 or more per vehicle to get your Florida license plate. Some zip codes that allegedly have a lot of insurance fraud, you can end up paying over $500 a month for 2 newer vehicles. Alright, so before we look at the top 10 worst cities in Florida for incomes, the places with the worst job markets, let's first take a look at other cities throughout the country so we can see how Florida compares. This should be fairly eye-opening for you to understand how bad Florida's labor market can be. If you're in the Santa Cruz, Watsonville area, your household median income will easily be over $100,000. Less than 13% of the population is living in poverty. A lot of people work from home and their commute times are under 26 minutes. Per capita incomes here are over $51,000. And while California housing costs are extremely expensive, if you're renting, housing costs in some parts of California are just about the same as what you would pay in Florida. In Seattle, Washington, the per capita income is over $60,000, and most families are making over $106,000. Less than 9% of the population is below poverty, and a huge chunk of the population is working from home with a commute time of under 29 minutes. In the Northeast, let's compare it to New London, Connecticut, where families are bringing in over $83,000. Per capita income is over $47,000. Less than 10% of the population is below the poverty line, and commute times are about 26 minutes. Number 1 is Palatka, Florida micro area. Despite having 75,000 people, the income analytics for this area are completely abysmal. In the northeast corner of the state, Jacksonville and St. Johns County do have higher incomes, but the moment you go a little further inland, that changes quickly. The average family is bringing in less than $47,000. Per capita incomes are $26,000, with over 23% of the population being in poverty and 43% of people under 18 living in poverty. Despite all that, people have to commute over 32 minutes. That's more than people in large cities like Seattle. That extremely long commute time would suggest that there's simply no jobs anywhere in this area. Number 2 is the Clewiston-LaBelle micro area located in Southwest Florida. Per capita incomes here do not exceed $21,000 and families are bringing in less than $40,000. 37% of people under 18 are living in poverty, which means that the total population, about 26%, are living in poverty. Commute times are longer than 30 minutes, and an incredible percentage of the population is having to carpool to work because they don't have their own transportation. Quite frankly, there are just very few families here that are making high income and in a somewhat expensive region of the state, considering that Miami and Southwest Florida are fairly expensive, which means that you're also competing for housing with people that are fleeing more expensive areas. So if the poverty analytics were not abysmal enough, you're also dealing with increasing real estate prices. There are really no good paying industries here. Agriculture is the only inflow of income that you can depend on. There's nothing in this region, and industries like the sugarcane production, who are known to pay very little, provide very little opportunity, are probably the only options you're going to have in one of the most impoverished regions of Florida. And if you're looking to be self-employed, the big industries have made sure that there's plenty of roadblocks so that you're not easily able to obtain a personal business license, because they want to make sure that the local labor force is accessible to them. You can expect that even being self-employed here will come with a plethora of challenges. Number 3 is the Arcadia micro area, aka DeSoto County, Florida. This is one of the poorest regions of the state, and the job market here is also abysmal. The area is plagued with poverty, and while being close to Sarasota means that a lot of people can commute, it also means that real estate prices here make absolutely no sense when you look at the per capita incomes under $20,000. Families are bringing in less than $40,000. 37% of people under 18 are living in poverty. The overall population, nearly a quarter, are living below the poverty line. Very few people here are high income earners. The vast majority earning very little and having to commute quite a bit to places in Southwest Florida for work. Just about the only benefit that this metropolitan area offers is that within less than an hour you can be in the outskirts of Sarasota and Lakewood Ranch. And if you're wanting to be self-employed, there's somewhat of a good old boy system here. So if your business is going to step on somebody's toes, you can expect that the county commissioners, code enforcement, and anybody else in local government is going to make your life quite literally impossible. Small minority businesses have told me of all the challenges that they've dealt with, since those people in charge simply do not want to help minorities establish businesses in their community. As well as that, they haven't taken the time to fix the roads. Most of the city's roads are in completely deplorable condition. County officials are more worried about ensuring that the good old boys are the ones driving and not caring anything about the people, despite the fact that the city commissioners, county officials, code enforcement, and anybody who has any type of power out here is ensuring that the communities cannot thrive by making roadblocks for the people. The condition of the city is absolutely deplorable. Despite having a considerable African American and Hispanic population, that doesn't mean that those businesses are thriving and they're not being faced with many roadblocks, as again, there's just a chokehold on the local economy by the good old boys. And I'm not making this up or exaggerating. This is quite literally what business owners have told me every single time I go to Arcadia. They just have a chokehold on the city, and only they are the ones making money while everybody else is pretty much starving. They simply do not want to help progress. When you look at Arcadia's geographical location, you'd think it would be thriving, but it's a community that's purposely being choked out of resources. because the people in charge there want all the money for themselves. Corruption plays a huge role into why Arcadia is just a poor place. The number 4 worst job market in Florida is Okeechobee, Florida. Per capita incomes here under $25,000 and $47,000 for families. 34% of people under 18 are in poverty, bringing close to 20% of the population to poverty. Despite the fact that the senior population is not living in poverty, they're doing okay. It's an area known for affordable retirement, but if you are looking for a job, you do not want to end up here. 15% of the labor force is commuting to work in a carpool. That's definitely not great. Other than agriculture, there really isn't anything to do in this area. And again, great area for affordable retirement, but if you need a job, stay clear of Okeechobee. Let's take a little break from Florida and see what job markets are looking like in Middle Tennessee. You met a retired ex-cop who wants to move back to her hometown to be near old friends, and she knows this little beautiful town called Laverne right outside of Nashville, and you're wondering, what are the job markets looking like in Middle Tennessee? Your kids are growing up, and pretty soon you're not going to be stuck having to pay child support in South Central Florida, and you're really looking for a refreshing new start. Well, let me tell you that when you look at Middle Tennessee, incomes are much nicer than much of Florida. Per capita incomes are about $43,000. Families are bringing in about $80,000. And only 13% of the children living here are in poverty. Much better analytics for your new family with your newfound wife. Number 5 is Sebring, Florida, located in the heart of Florida Highlands, South Central Florida. This is a really poor area. Per capita incomes are $31,000 and families are bringing in less than $53,000. The poverty rates really here are not staggering, but if you pay attention, poverty rates in the middle of the age group are not much better than on the edges, which means that the average middle-aged person here simply isn't making a lot of money. There's not a lot of opportunities, and just like some of the other counties in Florida, Highlands County isn't really helping small businesses thrive. They're more interested in helping out the interests of bigger corporations. The citrus and agriculture industries have a lot of power in local government to ensure that the local labor force is at their disposal. When the only core interest of a community is looking out for big industries, you can be certain that the communities are going to suffer, and Sebring has been plagued with this problem for quite a while now. Most communities in the United States really wouldn't put up with this situation, but when it comes to the particular people moving to Sebring, Florida, and the people that are living there now, bah, bah, bah. You want to be a sheep, man? Number 6 is Lakeland Winter Haven, aka Polk County, Florida. This area has horrible analytics for income. Per capita incomes are under $30,000. Families are making $62,000, and a disturbing amount of the population is living in poverty, including about a quarter of people under 18 are below the poverty line. People here are having to commute to Bradenton, Lakewood Ranch, Tampa, or Orlando for work, since Lakeland offers pretty much nothing. Before my daddy died, he taught me one thing. The sheriff man said that it's safe in Polk County and I should move here. And now me and my family are living in poverty and we have to commute to Bradenton. Yeah, so people actually believe, because their sheriff is a big-time celebrity, that this is a great place to move to. Little attention do they pay to the fact that the people that are living here have ridiculous commute times. The vast majority are having to commute over half an hour just to get to a dang job. But Jose, the sheriff said that. Number 7 is Lake City, Florida, located just south of the Georgia border. This is definitely one of the poorest places in Florida. 20% of the population is in poverty. 30% of people under 18 are in poverty. But commute times are relatively low and local real estate prices are affordable. So we're not going to be too harsh on Lake City because of its affordability. But with $28,000 as a per capita income, and families bringing in under $54,000 a year, it really isn't an attractive place to end up. Probably the reason because commute times are so low is because all the other large cities are so far that there's really no reason to look any further for jobs. There simply are not many options. So settle for whatever garbage job you can get in Lake City, Florida. Number 8 is Citrus County, Florida. Located just north of Tampa, this area has a huge problem with a massive elderly population. There simply isn't any young people here. And the drug overdose death rate in this county is the highest in the state of Florida. You are literally more likely to die from an OD in Citrus County than you are to be murdered in Detroit. The median age here is 57 years old. That means that most of the income in this county is not really coming directly from the labor force. So even though the income analytics for this county don't look horrendous, trust me, it's a lot worse than it looks on paper. So that while per capita income is $33,000 and families are making over $51,000, 31% of people under 18 are living in poverty. Commute times are not that high after all. Where the crap are you going to go for a job in a place that's desolate? Poverty rates for people under 18 are nearly 3 times higher than the senior population, which just goes to show the huge disconnect there is between those looking for affordable retirement and the miserable young people that are stuck having to change the diapers for the aging population. Number 9 is Wauchula, Florida. 25,000 people living in absolute poverty. There simply are not jobs here other than agriculture. $22,000 is the per capita income. The median household isn't even bringing in $42,000 a year. 41% of people under 18 are living in poverty. Now, those same poverty rates do not exist in the senior population, but let me tell you, it's not a place you want to end up if you need a job. If you're retiring, I guess it could work. It's not too far from the beaches, not too far from bigger cities. So if you don't mind a little bit of a commute, you can definitely enjoy this area. But if you're needing a job, it simply isn't worth it. Despite the staggering poverty, as we saw, the senior population here isn't doing too bad. And it is a nice little town. So it's not rated as bad as the rest of these cities. But the affordability is starting to become a problem here. It's actually starting to become as expensive here as the far outskirts of metropolitan areas that are nearby, like Sarasota and Bradenton, which simply doesn't make any sense. Florida can be a great place to retire affordably with warm weather, but as we have seen with the analytics of counties like Citrus and here in Wauchula, we can clearly see that a place that can work great for retirement can be a horrible place for somebody looking for a job. But the median age is kind of young in this county, and the population is Hispanic, and that's going to offset those incomes to look lower than you would expect. So don't think because those analytics look so harsh on paper that Wauchula is a horrible place. The people are friendly, there's great things to do, and it really is a great town. But if you need a job, it isn't really the place you want to be. Other than that, it really is a great little town. The great things about Wauchula are actually an incentive for you to want to be here, but be cautioned, you're going to struggle to find employment that pays decently. Observers driving into the town have told me it just looks like a really poor place to be. And the number 10 worst job market in Florida is Ocala. Yeah, when you look at Ocala on paper, it just doesn't look great. Per capita incomes, $30,000. Families, $54,000. A quarter of their population under 18 is living in poverty. These just are not great analytics. Commute times are low because the city of Ocala is the hub of that metropolitan area, so the jobs are there. They just don't pay a lot. Of course, you can see that disparaging difference between the senior population and the rest of the population, typical for this part of Florida. There simply are not too many people in Ocala making those higher income brackets. It really is a poor city to live in, and the affordability has increasingly become similar to the places in South Florida, as a lot of people are fleeing South Florida for affordability, are ending up in the Ocala area, only to find out that they are really struggling economically. And not only are they struggling, but on top of that, the cost of housing is starting to increase at an unparalleled amount to the incomes, which means it's actually a worse economical condition for those fleeing South Florida. So you've been warned, if you're fleeing South Florida, of the reality of the Ocala area, and those moving to the state of Florida should know that Ocala really ain't much if you need a job. Because despite the fact that Ocala simply doesn't offer anything, people have been moving here to the point that some parts of Ocala were recently some of the fastest growing places in the country by population growth, even though there's no jobs to support those people, which means things could only get worse in the future. If there's any type of economical instability, Ocala probably isn't the place you want to be. Accompany that with some of the highest overdose death rates in the state of Florida, and that doesn't make things any better. It is simply a difficult place to extract a dollar from, and consider again, with an aging population, at this metropolitan area, a lot of the income isn't even coming from the labor force. So once again, that elderly population kind of distorts these analytics. It's a lot worse than it looks on paper. By percentage of the population, the group between 60 to 80 are the two largest groups of the population. Homelessness and addiction are just rampant in this area. And that concludes our video on the top 10 worst labor markets, worst places for incomes in the state of Florida. You're probably wondering why the Florida Panhandle did not make this list, and there's a few reasons. The Florida Panhandle is kind of its own region in a lot of ways, and housing is somewhat affordable. Don't get me wrong, there are no large cities or great jobs in the Florida Panhandle, but there also isn't this unnecessary inflation of real estate prices in the Panhandle, which means that at least on the housing side, the little money you can find in the Florida Panhandle isn't being swallowed up by ridiculous housing. On the link to the video description, I will include census report, which is where I got this information from. And if you would like to explore that website, I definitely recommend it. At least in the state of Florida, it very accurately depicts what I'm seeing on the ground. I've been wanting to make this video for a long time for you guys, but it's been difficult to find analytics that match the real life information, but we're starting to see those numbers kind of line up to where I could feel comfortable making this video. I don't want to make a video about jobs that is misleading, because if you're moving to the state of Florida, that is definitely not an area I would want to give you any misleading information. So while this video is generally just my personal opinion, at least there are some analytics to back it up, which has been the reason you guys have not got this video from me. If you've wondered why I haven't made this video, it's because I've really struggled with the notion of making a video on something that affects people's lives if I can't get the information to line up properly. That's just how seriously I take my responsibility as a YouTube creator. But I'm well aware of other YouTube creators that are much larger than my channel who have absolutely no problem putting out misleading information for clickbaits simply to blow up their videos. And it's shameful that they're living a lavish YouTube lifestyle by misleading people, because some people actually see these videos, move to these places, and then find out later that the YouTuber who gave them that information was simply clickbaiting just for comments. That's horrendous. I don't do that on my channel. We make a lot of funny videos, we make a lot of crazy videos, but when I make a serious top 10 list like this, you know that the information that I'm giving you is as accurate as I can possibly compile for you. Even though it's nothing more than my personal opinion, I hope you guys liked today's video. And I will say that while Ocala did not look great on paper, I was surprised to see that Gainesville did look a little bit better. Gainesville, just north of Ocala, with a considerably younger population, has much better poverty analytics. The income isn't tremendously higher than Ocala, but at least the poverty rates are more controlled, which means it's a more balanced city and quite possibly more family friendly if you have kids. I hear that the Newberry area just west of Gainesville is a popular destination for people relocating from the state of Florida and not wanting to end up in a place that's completely marginalized economically if you're young or you're a family. And that is really the greater story of this video, that in Florida, there's places that are great for retirement, but they are horrible places for families and people who need to create income. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Make sure you hit the comment section, at least give me a like. This type of video, I know you guys love them, but they're very time consuming to make. And that's why it's important for you to interact with my video, because this video took up a lot of my time and it really needs to pay off. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a beautiful day.